Now it turns to me to introduce our second speaker for the proposition to continue the case for the proposition in tonight's debate, Afroze Fatima Zaidi. Thank you.
Hi, sorry. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone thank you to the speakers for introducing the debate. It's interesting for me to hear these arguments as somebody who is, who belongs to multiple minority communities. I think the first point that I would like to make, from that standpoint, is that freedom of speech, people speak about it as though it is some kind of, universal right, when actually the distribution or the availability of freedom of speech has never really been equitable in the first place. There have always been differences in how available freedom of speech is to any particular individual. So what we need to take into account is the power relations that are at play in our society, and the fact that more often than not, people who complain about being silenced because they're being no platformed, they come from a place in society where actually, removing a platform from them is not equal to silencing them. And they have, even if they are no platformed on occasion, they still have greater freedom of speech than someone like me or someone from a marginalized community would have. So I think it's quite important to, take that into account.
On that point?
No, thank you. So freedom of speech is not something that is equitably available, and neither are platforms, for that matter. You see, for instance, the BBC and how often they've hosted Nigel Farage. Even they continue to do so despite the fact that he is no longer a member of the European Parliament. He's not an MP, and he still somehow seems to have a say in everything to do with British politics, like who are you, why do you still have a say? And it's not, when you compare it to, somebody like Jeremy Corbyn, he's not considered a political commentator. No, thank you. In the same way that Nigel Farage is, in the same way that even Tony Blair is, he's not given a platform in that same way. He's not, given access to mainstream outlets, to mainstream media. And in fact, when we look at the, December 2019 election, actually, there was a very sustained campaign of vilification against Jeremy Corbyn, and there's been research done about this. This is not something that's a point of argument. So platforms, again, are not something that are equitably available. They're not something that is, it's not something that everyone has access to, and therefore, having a platform is a privilege. It's not a privilege that is available to everybody. And, no platforming, also, it's important, I think the point has already been made, but that no platforming is not the same as silencing someone or as taking away someone's freedom of speech, because what it simply means is that a particular institution is saying that we will not, give you the opportunity to propagate your views. That doesn't mean that that person does not have other avenues to do so, So for instance, Steve Bannon came to Oxford Union. This was back in 2018, I think. And at the time there was there was a fair bit of uproar about it. But the debate went ahead. I think it went ahead, they had to beef up security and they had like a limited audience and all kinds of things. And I remember at the time, one of the students defending it saying, oh, I may not agree with his views, but he has a right to speak. Well, he has a right to speak, and he also has like this massive, internet following. He has like other platforms on which he is able to spread his views. But when the Oxford Union hosts him, what they're really saying is that, yes, come, and it's basically a normalization of the kinds of views that Steve Bannon, chief advisor to Trump at one point, supporter of the border wall and so on, and all of the human rights atrocities that are associated with that. It's normalizing those views. I think it was the day after the day after the debate that there was a swastika painted on a community center in Oxford, right? So I think the whole way that the media operates at the moment, we don't seem to realize that actually by giving oxygen to these views, by giving prime time, slots to people like Nigel Farage and even Tommy Robinson and Steve Bannon, multiple interviews in mainstream outlets for Steve Bannon as well. By giving airtime to these views, what's happening is that the window of acceptable discourse is shifting ever more to the right, because it's not being counterbalanced by a similar, if you want to equate, for instance, far left and far right, which actually, I don't, and I don't think it's a reasonable comparison, but even if you did, there isn't a similar representation of far left views on media outlets, right? So who actually is it that's being no platformed? Who is it that's being silenced in reality? Yeah. So I think that we need to proceed on the basis that this is the context in which we are talking about no platforming. We are talking about no platforming in the context of increasing normalization of right-wing views, increasing normalization of hatred towards minorities. So I have no problems in supporting the right of organizations, and actually the need for organizations to say to individuals like Steve Bannon and Nigel Farage and Katie Hopkins and Tommy Robinson that actually your views are not welcome here. Because if they're not saying that, then what they're saying in effect to people like me is that I'm not welcome there, that they don't support my right to exist because they are platforming the views of these people who literally do not support my right to exist. Yeah. So I think we need to think about it in that context. It really frustrates me when people use the word silencing in relation to no platforming, because actually silencing happens anyway. It happens all of the time, but when it happens to people like me, to our communities, nobody notices. The only time that there's an uproar and people start making noise and shouting freedom of speech is when it's white people who are being silenced and far right people who are being, no platformed. MLK was used as an example when MLK, that is just laughable, honestly, because at the time, let me assure you, MLK was Martin Luther King was extensively silenced by the establishment, by the media around him. Yeah. To the extent that, with the Muslim community now, because of the pressures of Prevent, it's actually resulted in people, self-censorship and people not being able to share their views on, for instance, things like Palestine, or things, basically views that are critical of the state, because of the fact that Prevent has sort of caused this stranglehold on the freedom of expression of Muslims. Yeah, Muslims that oppose foreign policy, that oppose British foreign policy, Muslims that are against, who are vocal about, for instance, the UK support of Israel, they are then flagged up as being potentially at risk of radicalization. So silencing is happening, but what annoys me is that where it really is happening, people don't pay attention and aren't objecting to it. Yeah, so I think that maybe there needs to be a shift in priorities. What I want to end on is that really when we are looking at hosting speakers, I think what we need to look at is in terms of prioritizing of values. The democratic values that were mentioned by the opposition speaker just now, when we decide to host a speaker and we decide to give them a platform, we need to look at which democratic values we are prioritizing. Are we prioritizing the speaker's right to freedom of speech, or do we want to prioritize the right of minorities to safety, the right to have our humanity recognized, our right to practice our religion and to express our sexuality? What about those liberal values, right? And if these liberal values are threatened, then how is freedom of speech, how is someone else's freedom of speech more important than that? Thank you.